Here with reaction is Davis Younts, a military defense attorney for Younts Law. Davis, thank you for joining me today.
It's an honor.
I hope you had a great weekend, by the way. I want to start there.
Oh, thank you. I did.
Absolutely. So, by the way, what do you make of Senator Van Hollen, his approach on this? They're taking the due process argument. They're saying that Trump is going around the courts himself. What do you make of that?
There's so much here to unpack. It is it's a political stunt. That's what's happening here. But this, to me, I would make an analogy to problems that we have in progressive liberal states in the United States with squatters, right? It's this idea that you leave for vacation, you come home, someone is living in your home, and you can't kick them out because of the way the court system is set up because of due process. We have to understand what we're dealing with. We're dealing with individuals who broke the law, who disregarded our laws, who disregarded our sovereignty, who disregarded our national security, entered into this country illegally. That's the starting point. Our courts have long understood that's a national security issue, and that falls firmly under the authority of the executive branch. So just like you had different Soros-funded prosecutors targeting Trump with lawfare prior to the election, now that didn't work, this is the next stage of lawfare that they're engaging in. So they are foreign shopping. They are finding whatever progressive liberal judges they can, and they're trying to hold up Trump's agenda in federal courts. And then they're even twisting things that the Supreme Court is saying, but they're using administrative and these court processes to do it over and over again. And their goal is simply to slow this down. And mark my words, they want some judge, some liberal judge, to find President Trump in contempt of a federal judge's order, and then they're going to bring impeachment charges against him. Just watch, and they're going to want that to hold up Congress over and over and over again. So, that's a bit of a rant that I'm going on there, but this is a political stunt and is an extension of using the courts to do things they do not have the constitutional authority to do, that goes directly against our system, that goes directly against the results of an election, but also what our founding fathers intended. The courts are not tyrants. A local federal judge in a federal district court should not and does not have the legal authority to issue an injunction to stop the President of the United States from protecting the American people. And we have to start with that and step away from politics and go back to rational thought. We have to understand these stunts for what they are.
Yes, Davis, thank you. First point. So we've seen 2 bogus impeachments against President Trump in the past during his first term, but could you imagine them actually trying to impeach him for enforcing federal immigration law? It's like we're in the Twilight Zone. How dystopian is this? We've seen them abuse their power time and time again, but I think it's safe to say this would be a new low, even for activist judges, even for Democrats, and of course their ilk in the legacy media who continue to perpetuate propaganda and falsehoods about who we're talking about right now and his status in this country. But number 2, I sincerely want to ask you this. So we see all these injunctions against Trump. We see these rogue judges just really doing anything they can to fight for illegals to stay in the country. Where were they during the era of Bill Clinton, during the era of George Bush, Barack Obama, which I guess we saw a little bit of action during those times, but even still, why is this just becoming an issue right now?
It's blindly political, and it really does support an agenda of undermining our national security and our national sovereignty. Understand, when federal courts acted in those previous administrations, they usually only acted to tell states that they could not enforce their own border security. So our border states would do things to try to protect people that lived in their border towns, and they would be told by federal courts they couldn't do that, and they risk, imprisonment if they did, if sheriffs tried to enforce the border and protect their people. And now we see the opposite. But again, this has been created by a system, particularly in the Biden administration. You had Soros-funded organizations. You had these globalist organizations funding nonprofits, encouraging people to illegally come into the United States. We had a wide open border, and we made a mockery out of the asylum-seeking process. We used to have an asylum-seeking process that would work, where people who really were fleeing communism, fleeing religious persecution, fleeing Cuba, would have an opportunity to seek asylum because they were sincere and they were under threat. And what's happened is all of these organizations came together, the Biden administration came together, and they made that a joke. And essentially everyone coming to the United States would just claim asylum, and then it would take 10 years for them to get a hearing in an immigration court to be removed. And so we have to understand and just take a step back and say the system was intentionally fundamentally broken, and the Trump administration is now just trying to fix it to return some level of law and order and to protect the American people. So we're just seeing the chaos that's been sown, and it's not going to be easy to fix, but you see that that's what this administration is doing. They're trying to fix some of the chaos that's occurred.
Okay. Now, I do wonder as well on that note, that was very well said. So I do wonder about the end goal here. It's got to be one of two things. Either Democrats just don't want any deportations whatsoever, so lay down the law, make it so that no sitting president can ever deport someone who comes here illegally in the first place, which is very sinister. Or option B, they just don't want any deportations coming from the Trump administration specifically because they can't stand him. So which option do you think it really is?
I think for some, it's just blind political ideology. Trump derangement syndrome is taking over. So whatever it is Trump is doing, they want to be against it because that's how they raise funds. So they just want to counter anything Trump tries to do, or they really do want to have another show trial impeachment. So they want him to be found in contempt of some order, from a tyrannical judge. But I think there are many, many people who do not have the best interest of the United States at heart. And you see it because we have to open our eyes and look and say, okay, why are we bringing in all of these people from other countries with no control, people who are from terrorist, hotbeds, people who don't have the United States best interests and don't understand our culture, our tradition, our democracy. They've ruined their own countries, and now they're coming here and threaten to endanger it. At the same time, you have Democrats opposing at every turn any sort of ID program or enforcement to ensure that only United States citizens vote. So when you look at that, it's easy to become cynical and say there may be a greater agenda here, that Democrats really do believe they can just import votes. And if there's no voter ID, there's no election security. That becomes problematic moving into the future. So I don't necessarily like to go there first, but I do think we have to have our eyes open on this and understand we are in a fight for our national security in the future of our nation.
Certainly. Now, looking this weekend, we saw another round of protests coming from a lot of radical types in the streets. They're protesting deportations, they're protesting tariffs, they're protesting everything to do with Trump. And again, on the specific note of something like deportations, I have to say, where were the protests when George Bush was in office, or Bill Clinton, or Barack Obama, or basically every other president before them going back decades and decades? It seems to me that it's just astroturfed and manufactured. People are waving signs and chanting meaningless slogans that they probably don't even understand. And I just want to get your thoughts on this, Davis. Where was all this reactivity when other presidents did exactly what Trump is doing right now?
Yeah, we didn't see it. It wasn't there. And the real issue then, that gets back to it being political and it being astroturf is a great term for it, because go to these protests, watch the man on the street videos you see from them. People have the wrong signs at the wrong protests. People are asked, what does that mean? What does that sign mean? What are you here for? They can't answer it. These appear to be, manufactured protests. And it appears to be people who just want to be protesting something. So they've really succumbed to many of these mainstream media messages. They're deranged. They don't understand. They don't understand our history. They don't understand the importance of these issues, unfortunately. And so it gives them something to do in these protests. But at the same token, we see these so-called protests that are getting all of this coverage on the national media, but you see Trump's approval rating is high. It's higher now than it was during the first quarter of his first term, and even more so on critical issues like immigration enforcement, simply enforcing the law. Those are extremely popular amongst all voting blocs. And yet, these protesters, as well as some in the Democratic Party, continue to double down on these issues. Doesn't make a lot of sense unless it's either I'm going to oppose Trump no matter what because I'm deranged, or there's some sort of nefarious intent here that really is designed to fundamentally transform America into some sort of globalist entity.
Oh, sure, Dave. And Davis, if I can, even in some of those reports and polls that you see, people aren't just in favor of deportations. They want deportations for everybody, regardless of whether or not you're in MS-13 or Tren de Aragua. So that's a very important point to bring up. But also, speaking of protests, a lot of people are very upset about the showdown between Harvard University and the Trump administration. The Trump administration administration now apparently, reportedly, making plans to withhold another $1 billion of funding from the university itself. What do you make of this whole situation?
You know, this is one of those things where universities that want to call themselves private universities are fully dependent on government funds for so much of what they do. And that's where the hypocrisy and the irony is, because they'll take all of this federal funding for grants, even in the form of federal student loans, tuition grants, and other things. And yet, as soon as there is a pushback, when they're doing things that are clearly damaging to the United States, that are damaging to our future, that involve, you know, indoctrinating college kids with progressive anti-American ideology, and all of a sudden you push back. You know, my take on that is if you're going to accept federal funding as a university, you need to be prepared to either accept and not do things that upset the federal government and accept federal controls, or divorce yourself from it. But don't cry when you are a university with an endowment like Harvard and suddenly some of your federal funds are drying up. I think it's good. I think it's positive, and Harvard can raise money if its alumni base wants to support it and what it's doing. But there's huge problems at all of these elite universities, so-called elite universities, not just with anti-Semitism and protests, but with just indoctrinating these college kids with anti-American progressive ideology. And it doesn't make sense, if we're looking at the best interest of the United States, to continue printing money for these universities so that they can destroy our country.
Certainly. Defund them all. I'm glad you said this. If these are really private schools, then why do they rely so much on the taxpayer? Especially because they have this giant endowment that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger over the years. They're clearly overcharging people. And for what? I mean, if you're in the shoes of, say, a Jewish student or someone who's very pro-Israel and outspoken about it, then maybe you get harassed, attacked, criticized, maybe you're verbally harassed or prevented from accessing certain student buildings. So something's got to change. I think that they are taking a very weird and aggressive approach here, Harvard. We'll see what happens, but I'm really happy to see an administration finally cracking down on this very widespread problem. I wish them Godspeed, and Davis, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Take care.
Left to men like Davis Younts fight for these Navy SEALs.
Davis Younts, you are an attorney who has successfully defended naval